Hi guys. Okay, so we are now on page 7 of our dodecahedron. We are going to be choosing a character from the book, decide what would be an appropriate birthday present for them, and explain why. Okay? So we need to be careful with answering the prompt. Be creative and remember to write in complete sentences, okay? That means capital letters, that means punctuation, that means clear handwriting. I want to see your thoughts on what character might want for their birthday present, okay? Also, today is Miss Chris' birthday. If you watch my video, can you send her a birthday wish for me? Okay, that's just for us, okay? All right, back into our story. So we're going to go ahead and read our chapters 13 and 14 today. We are at a troggle humper from the Fresh Plump Eater. These names are really crazy, but we'll try to get through them, okay? Again, chapters 13 and 14, thinking about, okay, what might a character want for their birthday? They is always having 50 winks before they goes scrumbling off hunt human beings in the evening, the BFG said. He stood for a few moments to let Sophie have a better look. Giants is only sleeping every then and now, he said. Not nearly as much as human beings. Human beings is crazy for sleeping. It is ever occurring to you that a human being who is 50 is spending about 20 years sleeping fast? By the way, that actually is true. We spend about a third of our lives sleeping, which is crazy, but it's good for us. It's what our body needs. I must admit that never occurred to me, Sophie said. You should allow it to occur to you, the BFG said. Imagine it, please. This human being who says he is 50 has been fast asleep for 20 years, is not even knowing where he is, not even doing anything, not even thinking. It's a funny thought, Sophie said. Exactly, the BFG said. So what I is trying to explain to you is that a human being who says he is 50 is not 50. He's only 30. What about me? Sophie said. I'm 8. You is not 8 at all, the BFG said. Human being babies and little children is spending half their time sleeping. So you's only 4. I'm 8, Sophie said. You may think you is 8, the BFG said, but you has only spent 4 years of your life with your little eyes open. You's only 4, and please stop higgling me. Chitchy little snap whippers like you should not be higgling around with an old sage and onions who is hundreds of years more than you. How much do giants sleep? Sophie asked. They's never wasting much time snoozing, the BFG said. 2 or 3 hours is enough. When do you sleep? Sophie said. Even less, the BFG answered. I am sleeping only once in a blue baboon. Sophie, peeping out from her pocket, examined the 9 sleeping giants. They looked even more grotesque now than they were awake. Sprawled out across the yellow plain, they covered an area about the size of a football field. Most of them were laying on their backs, with their enormous mouths wide open, and they were snoring like foghorns. The noise was awful. Suddenly, the BFG gave a jump in the air. By gum frog, he cried. I is just having the worst whoopsie-whiffling idea. What? Sophie said. Wait, he cried. Hold your horse feathers. Keep your skirt on. Just you wait to see what I was going to bring about. He galloped up fast to his cave with Sophie hanging on tight to the rim of the pocket. He rolled back the stone. He entered the cave. He was very excited. He was moving more quickly. You stay where you is in my pocket, Hugby, he said. We is doing this lovely bit of buck-washing both together. He laid aside the dream-catcher net, but hung on to the suitcase. He ran across to the other side of the cave and grabbed the long trumpet thing, the one he had been carrying when Sophie had first met him in the village. With the suitcase in one hand and the trumpet in the other, he dashed out of the cave. What is he up to now? Sophie wondered. Keep your head up good, BFG said. Then you will get a fine wiggle of what is going on. I wonder what he's going to do to them. When the BFG came near to the sleeping giants, he slowed his pace. He began moving softly. He crept on his toes towards the ugly brutes. They were still snoring loudly. They looked repulsive, filthy, diabolical. The BFG tiptoed around them. He went past the guzz gulper, the bud bottler, and the meat dripper and child chewer. Then he stopped. He reached the flesh lump eater. He pointed at him, then he looked down at Sophie and gave her a big wink. They're going to be up to something. He knelt on the ground and very quietly he opened the suitcase. He took out one of the glass jars containing the terrible nightmarish charcoal humper. And at that point, Sophie guessed what was going to happen next. Ouch, she thought. This would be rather dangerous. She crouched lower in the pocket so that only the top of her head and her eyes were showing. She wanted to be ready to duck out of sight very fast should anything go wrong. Gotta make sure that they're not gonna wake up and get themselves hurt because of the giants waking up in a nightmare. But we'll have to see. They were about 10 feet away from the flesh lump eater's face. The snoring, snorting noise he was making was disgusting. Every now and again, a big bubble of spit formed between his two open lips, and then would burst at the splash and cover his face with saliva. Ugh. Taking infinitive care, the BFG unscrewed the top of the glass jar and tipped the squiggling, squirming, faintly scarlet charcoal humper into the wide end of his long trumpet. He put the other end of the trumpet to his lips. He aimed the instrument directly at the flesh lump eater's face. He took a deep breath, puffed out his cheeks, and then woof! He blew. Sophie saw a flash of pale red go darting towards this giant's face. With a split second, it hovered above the face, then it was gone. It seemed to have been sucked up by the giant's nose, but it had all happened so quickly, Sophie couldn't be sure. We had better be skittling away quick to where it is safe, the BFG whispered. He trotted off to about 100 yards, then he stopped. He scratched low to the earth. Now, he said, he is waiting for the gun and flames to begin. It didn't have long to wait. The air was suddenly pierced by the most fearsome roar Sophie had ever heard, and she saw the flesh lump eater's body, all 54 feet of it, rise up off the ground and fall back again with a thump. Then it began to wriggle and twist and bounce about in its most violent fashion. It was quite frightening to watch. Yow! Roared the flesh lump eater. Yow! He's still asleep, the BFG whispered. The terrible trouble thumping nightmares beginning to hit him. Served him right, Sophie said. She could feel no sympathy for this great brute, who was ate children as though they were sugar lumps. Save us, screamed the flesh lump eater, thrashing about madly. He is after me, he's getting me. The thrashing of limbs was the waving of arms became more violent by the second. It was an awesome thing to watch such a massive creature having such mighty convulsions. Convulsions mean that he was shaking and basically like jerking about like you do sometimes when you're asleep. It's Jack, bellowed the flesh lump eater. It's the grewful, grumptious Jack. Jack is after me. Jack is rackling me. Jack is spy-ticking me. Jack is splash-funking me. It is terrible Flip-Swip Jack. The flesh lump eater was writhing above the ground like some colossal tortured snake. Oh, spare me, Jack, he yelled. Don't hurt me, Jack. Who is this Jack he's on about? Sophie whispered. Jack is the only human being all giants is frightened of, the BFG told her. They is all absolutely terrified of Jack. They is all hearing that Jack is a fiend's giant killer. Save me, screamed the flesh lump eater. Have mercy on this poor little giant, the beanstalk. He is coming at me with his terrible spike-stitching beanstalk. Take it away, I is begging you, Jack. I is praying you not touch me with your terrible spike-stitching beanstalk. Us giants, the BFG whispered, is not knowing very much about this dreaded human being called Jack. We is only knowing only that he is a famous giant killer, and that he is owning something called the beanstalk. We is knowing also that the beanstalk is a fearsome thing, and Jack is us using it to kill giants. Sophie couldn't stop smiling. What is you giggling about? The BFG asked her, slightly nettled. I'll tell you later, Sophie said. Remember Jack and the Beanstalk from when we were little? Yeah, that's what they're talking about. They're afraid of Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk. The awful nightmare had now gripped the great brute to such an extent that he was trying his whole body into knots. Don't do it, Jack, he screeched. I was not eating you, Jack. I was never eating human beings. I swear I was never called a single human being in all of my wholesome life. Liar, said the BFG. Just then, one of the Flesh Lump Eater's flailing fists caught the still fast asleep meat-dripping giant smack in the mouth. At the same time, one of his fearless, thrashing legs kicked the snoring, giz-gulping giant right in the guts. Both the injured giants woke up and leaped to their feet. "He's swiping me right in the mouth," yelled the meat dripper. "He is scrub-woggling me smack in the guts," shouted the Gruz Crippler. And the two of them rushed at the Flesh Lump Eater and began pounding him with their fists and feet. The wretched Flesh Lump Eater woke up with a bang. He awoke straight from one nightmare into another. He roared into battle, and with one bellow-thumping rough and tumble that followed, one sleeping giant after another either got stepped upon or kicked. Soon all 9 of them were on their feet, having the most almighty free-for-all. They punched and kicked and scratched and bit and butted each other as hard as they could. Blood flowed, noses were crunched, teeth fell out like hailstones. The giants roared and screamed and cursed, and for many minutes the noise of battle rolled across the yellow plain. The BFG smiled, big, wide smile of absolute pleasure. He was loving it when they was all having a good, tough, and rumble. He said, "They'll kill each other," Sophie said. "Never," the BFG answered. "Those beasts is always bishing and wappling at one another. Soon it'll be getting dusk, and they'll be galloping off to fill their tummies." "They're coarse and foul and filthy," Sophie said. "I hate them." As the BFG headed back to the cave, he said quietly, "He certainly was putting that nightmare to good use, though, wasn't he?" "Excellent use," Sophie said. "Well done, you." Yeah. So they went and sent the bad dream on to one of the giants. All right, here we go with our chapter 14, Dreams. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in his cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the tabletop nearby, watching him at work. The glass jar containing the one and only good dream they had caught that day stood between them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. "What are you writing?" Sophie asked him. "Every dream is having its special label on the bottle," the BFG said. "How else could I be finding the one I'm wanting in a hurry?" "But can you really and truly tell what sort of dream is going on simply by listening to it?" Sophie asked. "I can," the BFG said, not looking up. "But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes?" "Yes, less or more right," the BFG said. "Every dream in the world is making different sort of buzz hum music, and these grand swashbuckling ears of mine is able to read that music." "By music do you mean tunes?" "I is not meaning tunes." "Then what do you mean?" "Human beings is having their own music, right or left." "Right. Lots of music," Sophie said. "And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they is hearing wondrous music. They is getting shivers down their spindles, right or left." "Right," Sophie said. "So the music is saying something to them. It is sending a message. I do not think the human beings is knowing what the message is, but they is loving it just the same." "That's about right," Sophie said. "But because of these gem-squiffling ears of mine," the BFG said, "I is not only able to hear the music that the dream is making, but as I is understanding it also." "What do you mean by understanding it?" Sophie said. "I can read it," the BFG said. "It talks to me. It is like a language." "So like a language of music." "I found that just a little hard to believe," Sophie said. "I'll bet you is also finding it hard to believe in quig-quigglers," the BFG said, "and how they is visiting us from the stars." "Of course I don't believe that," Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. "I hope you will forgive me," he said, "if I tell you that human beings is thinking that is very clever, but they is not. They is nearly all of them not muchers and squickbits." "I beg your pardon?" Sophie said. "The matter with you human beings," the BFG went on, "is that they is absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they is actually seeing it right in front of their own snozzles. Of course, Quicklewiggles is existing. I is meeting them often. I is even chittering to them." He turned away contemptuously from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie looked over to read what he had written on the jar. The letters were printed big and bold, but were not very well formed. Here's what it said. Okay, so remember, this is printed for us so we can read it, but for him, he would have been kind of squiggled. It says, this dream is about how I is saving my teacher from drowning. I is diving into the river from a high bridge, and I is dragging my teacher to the bank, and then I is giving him the kiss of death. Seems like something's a little misunderstood there. The kiss of what? Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. I was telling you once before, he said quietly, but I was never having a chance to go to school. I was full of mistakes. They is not my fault. I do my best. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly Miss Know Everything yourself. I'm sorry, Sophie said. I really am. It is very rude of me to keep correcting you. The BFG gazed at her for a while longer. Then he bent his head again to his slow, laborious writing. Tell me honestly, Sophie said, if you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I saved my teacher from drowning by diving off the bridge? More, the BFG said, a lot more, but I cannot be scribbling the whole Grotfunkel dream on a sticky piece of paper. Of course there's more. The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one massive ear close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. Yes, he said, nodding his great head solemnly up and down. This dream is continuing very nice. It was a very dory-hunky ending. How does it end? Sophie said. Please tell me. You would be dreaming, the BFG said, that the morning after you was saving the teacher from the river, you was arriving at school and you was seeing all the 500 pupils sitting in the assembly hall, and all the teachers as well, and the head teacher is then standing up and saying, I is wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie, because she is so brave and is saving the life of our fine arithmetic teacher, Mr. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off the bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie. And the whole school is then cheering like mad and shouting, bravo, well done. And forever after that, even when you is getting your sums all squizzwiggled and muggled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. Then you is waking up. I like that dream, Sophie said. Of course you like it, the BFG said. It is the 5th wizard. He licked the back of the label and stuck it on the jar. I is usually writing a bit more than this on the labels, he said, but you was watching me and making me jumpsy. Go and sit somewhere else, Sophie said. Don't go, he said. Look in the jar carefully, and I think you'll be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar, and then, sure enough, she saw the faint, translucent outline of something about the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of color in it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, the small oblong sea jellyfish thing at the bottom of the jar, quite peaceful but pulsing gently, the whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly, as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it's alive. What will you feed it on? Sophie asked. It is not needing any food, the BFG told her. Well, I mean, it's a dream. It doesn't need food. That's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs some food, even trees and plants. The north wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving. It touches you on the cheek and on the hands, but nobody is feeding it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is waiting peaceably forever until it is released and allowed to do its job. If it's a bad one, it is always fighting to get out, like the one that they sent on the other giant. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please, can I see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before, he said, but perhaps after all I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here are some of the good dreams, he said, the fibs wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels? Sophie said. My label is only telling bits of it. the BFG said. The dreams is usually much longer. The label is just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right round the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said. Today I was sitting in class and discovered I was staring very hard at my teacher in a special way. I was able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her, and in the end, her head dropped onto her desk, and she goes fast asleep and snorkles loudly. Then in marches the head teacher and the shouts, "Wake up, Miss Plumridge! How dare you go to sleep in class? Go fetch your hat and coat and leave the school forever. You is sacked." But in a jiffy I was putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he just crumples slowly to the ground like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling and even louder than Miss Plumridge, and then is hearing my mummy's voice saying, "Wake up, your breakfast is ready." Interesting. What a funny dream, Sophie said. It's a ring beller, the BFG said. It's whoopsie. Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently sea green like the other one, but perhaps a trifle larger. Do you have separate dreams for boys and for girls? Sophie asked. Of course, the BFG said. If I was giving a girl's dream to a boy, even if it was a really whoopsie girl's dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking, what a rotten, bungling, gruesome old dream was that? The boy would, Sophie said. Here is all girls' dreams on this shelf, the BFG said. Can I read a boy's dream? You can, the BFG said, and he lifted her to the higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read as follows. I was making myself a marvelous pair of suction bottoms, and when I was putting them on, I was able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. While I was walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she is starting to yell at me, and she always does, yelling, "What on earth is you doing up there walking on the ceiling?" And I was looking down at her, and I smile, and I say, "I told you you was driving me up the wall, and now you has done it." You know, I think that would have been funny if I would have had that dream too. I find that one rather silly, Sophie said. Boys wouldn't, the BFG said, grinning. It's another ring beller. Perhaps you've seen enough now. Let me read another boy's one, Sophie said. The next label said, the telephone rings in our house, and my father picks it up and says in his very important telephone voice, Simpkin speaking, then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny, and he says, "What? Who?" And then he says, "Yes, sir, I understand. Sit, but surely it's me he was wishing to speak to, sir, and not my little son." My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he's gulping like he's a lobster stuck in his throat, and then at last he's saying, "Yes, sir, very well, sir, I'll get him, sir." And then he turns to me and he says in a rather respectful voice, "Is you knowing the President of the United States?" And I say, "No, but I expect is hearing about me." Then I was having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, "Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it your way." And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head, and that is when is hearing my father's real voice saying, "Get up, you lazy slob, or you will be late for school." Interesting. So he talks to the president. Boys are crazy, Sophie said. Let me read this next one. She started reading the next label. I was having a bath and discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, "Where is that child? He was in the bath a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly." So I say, "Here I is," and she says, "Where?" And I says, "Here," and she says, "Where?" And I says, "Here," and then she says, "Henry, come up quick." And when my daddy rushes in, I was washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around the air, but of course it's not seeing me, and he shouts, "Where are you, boy?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And I says, "Here, where?" And then I says, "Where?" I says, "Here." And he says, "Soap, boy, the soap, the flying in the air." Then I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible. My daddy is whiffling with excitement, and he is saying, "Use the invisible boy." And I say, "No, I is going to have some fun." And when I is out of the bath, and I have dried myself, and I put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I have pressed my tummy button again to become invisible, and I go down to the town and walk in the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not the things I wear is in. So when people are seeing me dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in there's a panic and everybody's yelling a ghost, and people are screaming left and right and big and strong and policemen is running for their lives. And best of all, I have seen my grumpy, my algebra teacher, coming out of the pub, and I was floating up to him and saying boo, and he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub, and then I was waking up and feeling happy as a squid fiddler. Wow, that was really detailed. Pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is very mystical things, the BFG said. Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even the brainiest professors in understanding them. Has you seen enough? Just this last one, Sophie said. This one here. She started reading. I has written a book and is so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you read the first line, you is hooked. So you cannot put it until the last page. And all the sights people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other because their faces buried in my book, and Dennis is reading it and trying to fill their teeth at the same time. But nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist's chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeon is reading while they are operating, and brains are airline pilots is reading it and going to the Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down. So is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book. And when I wake up, I still tingling with excitement of being the greatest writer in the world has ever known, until my mommy comes in and says I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really your spelling is atrocious. So is your punctuation. Oops. Well, again, that's why we learn how to write. That punctuation, capital letters, punctuation at the end, sentence structure, that's why we practice. That's enough for now, BFG said. There's billions more, but my arm is getting tired holding you up. What are all those over there? Sophie said. Why have they got such tiny labels? That, the BFG said, is because one day I was catching so many dreams, I was not having the time or energy to write out long labels, but there's enough to remind me. Can I look? Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. I is climbing Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I is only 8 years old little boy, but I is growing splendid bushy beard and all the other boys is jealous. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I is a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG. I have been wondering how long it is before you was asking me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvelous, Sophie said. How did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book very old and tattered. By human standards, it was an ordinary-sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hand. One night, he said, I was going to dream through a window, and I see this book lying on a little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly, you understand, but I was refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how did you get it? Sophie asked. I borrowed it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short time I borrowed it. How long have you had it? Sophie asked. Perhaps only about 80 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back. And how you taught yourself to write? Sophie asked him. I was reading hundreds of times, the BFG said, and I was still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrumdiddlyumptious story. Sophie took out the book of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud. By Doll Chickens, the BFG said. By who? Sophie asked. Just then there came a tremendous noise from galloping feet from outside the cave. What's that? Sophie cried. That is the giant Zip fiddling off to another country to guzzle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket, then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie peeked out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at full gallop. Where is you off to tonight? Chatted the BFG. We is all us flumbucking off to England tonight, answered the flesh Peter as they went galloping past. England is a luscious land, and we is fancying a few nice little English childers. I, shouted the maiden usher, I know where there's a giggle house for girls, and I was guzzling myself as a fizz blower. And I know where there's a boggle box for boys, shouted the Gizgumpler. All I had to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys tasting extra liquishy. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking her head out of the pocket. What is the Giggle House for girls? He's meaning a girls' school, the BFG said. He'll be eating them by the bundle. Oh no, cried Sophie. And for boys, a boys' school, said the BFG. It mustn't happen, Sophie cried out. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing. There's not a thing we can do, the BFG said. We as helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a large craggy blue rock near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket, put her beside him on the rock. It's not quite safe for you to be outside until it is coming back, he said. The sun had dripped down the horizon, and it was getting dark. Oh no, they're going to go to schools! We'll have to see if they end up actually eating them or if somehow they end up stopping. All right, just a reminder, we are going to be writing on our number 7 dodecahedron page. We're choosing a character from the book, deciding what might be a good birthday present for them, and you have to explain why. All right? If you guys have any questions, let me know, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye, guys.